Hey, good morning, everyone. And I'm one of the pastors around here. Um, it makes me sound very American. It's the system. It's not me, really. Um, hey, we're concluding our series, our Dear Younger Me series this morning, as we are looking at Proverbs. It's good, man. Whatever you do, I'm just going to keep going. All right, you edit what you don't like. So this is a book. Ready, Eddie? Use the handheld. All right. Yeah, they give the senior pastors the good mics here. That's how that works. So hey, we're concluding our series called Dear Younger Me as we're looking at the book of Proverbs. Now, the book of Proverbs is a book that's all about wisdom. And the essence of wisdom is about learning to make wise choices, because we are all making choices all the time. Life is full of choices. Choices about if you're studying, what kind of major are you going to study? What kind of career do you want to have? What uni are you going to go to get that kind of career? Where should I live? Should I get married? Who should I marry? When should I get married? Should I have children? When should we have children? How should I raise my children? How do I get my grown children to leave the house? Decisions all the time, all through life. Lots and lots of choices that we constantly have to make. Now, in most cases, the choices that we have to make, like when should I retire or how will I fund my retirement, in most cases, our choices are moral. All right, they're legal. They're almost always the options are allowable. All right, they're usually a choice between good and good. And I just got to make what choice I think is best at the time. How do we do that? How do we choose? How do we decide which, out of all the many options that we have in life, which option should we take? How do I know the will of God? For sure. For sure. No questions. How do I know the will of God? I have no idea. This is going to be the shortest sermon ever. I have no idea. No, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the book of Proverbs. And we're going to look at how Proverbs talks about playing the long game of life. How do we make wise choices in the plans we make for our life? Now, this is a topic that I wrestle with, how to make wise plans. How do you make the right choice? 2 years ago, I had to make a huge decision 2 years ago. I was offered a job in Tauranga. Should I take this job in Tauranga? Or should I stay here in Auckland and not knowing really where I'm going to work, but should I just stay in this city? See, my life 2 years ago had been turned upside down on its head. And I had to make some major, major life-changing decisions. I had to get a different job so I could take care of my daughters. Tauranga seemed like the perfect option. It was a great job. It was a better high school. It gave affordable housing. I mean, how's God not in that? There's affordable housing. But there would be all kinds of relational difficulties around that choice if I was choose to go that way. Or do I choose to stay in Auckland? Do I stay here in town? Where there was no foreseeable work options at the time. It was inconceivable to ever buy a house in this city ever again. But it would negate some of the other difficulties that would come up if I chose the other way. How do I make that choice? I went through this emotional tailspin. I totally obsessed. What do I do now? How do I know what to do for sure, God? How do I know what to do? I would lay awake at night just wondering, what am I going to do? I would get up and I would walk the floor of where I was living, trying to figure out, what am I going to do? I would think about it in every spare moment. What am I going to do? And as you know, really good people have lots of good advice for you. And so I got lots of good advice. They told me things like, look, just ask God for peace in the decision that I make, and then you'll know the decision's right. Or, look, ask God to give you a sign, and then you'll know what to do. Or, Brian, what do you think God is saying to you about this right now? Or, how do you feel God is leading you in the decisions you need to make? Then other groups of people would say, look, do not make a decision until you are absolutely certain that this is the right one. That helped me sleep that night. And then I had other friends who were pastors because I was looking at ministry options. Look, just don't do anything until you feel that you are called to do it. And because at that time I had a part-time job working with pastors, they often told me with massive confidence, look, I've been where you've been, but God was very clear and led me to this place, in this city, in this church. I just wait till you sense his calling. Now, all that did was just keep me up later. I felt no peace. I felt no certainty. I didn't have any specific sense of a place to go in my calling. Instead, I just felt more and more unsure the more I thought about it. And I became paralyzed. You become paralyzed in the waiting for a leading. I became paralyzed in a waiting for peace, waiting until I knew for sure what to do. And I became afraid to do anything, afraid to make any decision, afraid to make any move, because now how can I be sure that my decision is the will of God? I mean, I've seen those sci-fi movies. I've seen what happens when you make the wrong decision. You make a mistake and you go the wrong direction. I mean, how did I know if my decision might set off a whole chain of reactions that would lead to disaster for my daughters and quite possibly catastrophe for the entire planet? I mean, it could happen, right? It could happen. So how do I know this is the right decision? So I thought, okay, let's just do what you always used to tell students when you taught at Bible college. And I picked up the Bible. And I started studying. And I started to re-study the Bible. What does it teach about how to make a decision? I didn't look for the Bible to find an answer. That what does the Bible teach to make a decision? I talked to other professors and other Old Testament lecturers and New Testament lecturers. I read some books that they recommended. And I started looking at stuff and asking questions. How am I taught by the Bible how to make decisions? Does the Bible teach that you should do what people are advising you to do? Does the Bible teach that I should seek peace in my heart before I make a decision? Does the Bible teach to ask God to give you a sign? Does the Bible teach to wait until you get this clear leading and that small, quiet voice before you make a decision? And I studied the Bible about how to make decision-making as voraciously as an American looking for a Dunkin' Donuts shop. And it's what I did. And I just studied and asked questions and read stuff. And I actually found that none of those ideas that I was told by other people are prescribed to us as followers of Christ in the Bible. Not a single one of those ideas is found in the Bible on how to find the will of God. Not one. And yet, those are the kind of advice I hear all the time. I'm sure that's the kind of advice you hear all the time. But slowly as I studied, as I read, as I spoke to other people about what I was learning, I found myself kind of sleeping at night again and not pacing the floor anymore. And I literally became set free from the bondage of this emotional and spiritual slavery that came from these very unbiblical models on how to make a decision. And I started to breathe again. See, I think there's a model that has infected Christian thinking and is leading to crippling indecision, is leading to bad decisions, at least in my life, and I would guess in most of our lives as well. And this journey to decision-making freedom began when I began to look at this book of Proverbs. And then I read a book written about what the book of Proverbs says about decision-making. And then I started to look at how God actually guides us through life. So what I want us to do is first look at a passage in Proverbs that I think is so misunderstood, so misquoted, so taken out of context that it sets us up for bad decisions. We're going to look at that, spend most of our time on that passage, and then we're going to look at this tsunami of wisdom that Proverbs gives on decision-making after that. So if you got your Bibles, but I have it up on the screen, look at Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Now, I thought I knew what this passage meant. I actually wrote this on a piece of paper and kept it in my pocket. I would look at it and go, I know what this means. I actually thought I knew what this meant. I was wrong. See, I thought it meant that if you're sincere enough, God will show you the way. If you really mean it, God will show you the way. And I think I thought that because when I first was taught this verse, and when I memorized it in the early Sunday school years of my life, and people quoted to me, it was always the King James Version. And the King James Version says, and he shall direct your paths. And I misunderstood that because that's the one I memorized. That he will direct, he will reveal his plan to me if I'm sincere enough. But that's not actually what the passage says. What the passage literally says is that he will make your paths straight. There's a huge difference between that and he will direct. What this means, what this passage means is your direction will be changed. It means that the kind of life you live, the kind of path you walk, the way of life that you live, the way you're headed, all that will be changed because your bearings will be changed. It doesn't say when you're sincere enough, God will show you the future. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say if you trust God enough, he will direct you to choose either door number 1 or door number 2 or door number 3. That's not what it's saying. It doesn't even say that once you receive a sense of peace and direction in your heart, you can make a choice. It doesn't say that either. What it's actually saying is that you will change into the kind of person who's going to make the right choice. And all of a sudden, things start to become clearer for me. Now, let's look at the implications of this verse. This implies that there are some things that the will of God is not, all right? First of all, God's will is not about finding the dot. Right, now this phrase, finding the dot, this is how one friend explained it to me during that first year, a couple years ago. It's not about finding that one right dot. It's not about finding that in the whole sea of dots, there's one right choice that you need to make. Think of all the options that you have before you in life. All the options about who to marry, what job to take, what city to live in. Any fork in the road that you come to in your life, it's not usually ever an either or decision. Rarely. There's lots of options out there. The idea of finding the dot, that there is one choice that is God's perfect will for you, that there is one right person to marry, there is one right place to live, there is one right career path to take. And if you mess that up and you make the wrong choice, that you're going to be out of the will of God for a very, very long time, is dangerous thinking. And the Bible doesn't teach it. The Bible doesn't teach that. And in fact, the Bible teaches the exact, literally flip side of that, the total opposite of that. From the very beginning, God does not tell Adam and Eve, you may only eat from the one perfect tree in the garden from you. That is my perfect will from you. And you will be out of my will if you eat from any of the other trees. You have to eat from the one perfect tree. But I'm not going to tell you which tree that is. You're going to have to discern what tree you can eat from your feelings and your impressions in your heart. So, Adam, Eve, good luck with that. He doesn't say that. No, what does he tell Adam and Eve? He says, you can eat from any tree in the garden, any tree that's out there. Have fun. I created this for you. It's your choice, except for this one. Except for just this one, which would be death to you. And to this day, we still live according to the same ratio. We still have the same ratio. God forbids a few things. His moral law is pretty clear in Scripture. But from any other tree in the garden, you're free to eat. See, there's a lot more freedom in God's will than most of us ever realize, and most of us ever give him credit for. Dot thinking can make you go crazy, absolute crazy. It creates a paralysis, and it's a paralysis of analysis, is what my friend said. It just kind of messes with your head. And if you have a perfectionist personality, and I lean towards perfectionism, it can make you become so afraid that you can't make any choice because you're afraid you might miss that one right dot. But on the other hand, if you have kind of an overconfident personality, then you can think that, I've prayed, I've had a hunch, that hunch is the will of God, 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 God. And no matter what people say, no matter what people show you, you will not be persuaded that your hunch might need to be reconsidered. And instead of paralysis, it creates arrogance. And you make a hunch become prophecy. So many books I've read then point to how you make that hunch. And secondly, God's will is not actually a technique. Finding God's will is not a technique. So many books that I read and speakers I've listened to teach that finding God's will is based on a certain technique, right? And by using this technique to discern the will of God, that whole idea of a technique is not fundamentally Christian at all. It's actually a pagan idea that came from the pagan religions, the Roman religions and the Greek religions and the Egyptian religions. They're all happening during the time when Jesus was walking the planet and the Bible, the New Testament, was being written. It was called divination, all right? Divining God's will for the future. It was all about techniques to find the will of God. Remember these things? When you were growing up? Remember these 8 balls? Remember these? You'd ask a question, and you would you'd shake it, ask a question, and whatever answer floated to the top, that was right. So like right now, I'm getting yes, definitely. Yeah, see, you want to know what question I just asked, don't you? You want to know what I asked question. See, it's one of those things that you ask a question.